Hello, everybody. Today is Friday, November 21st, and my name is Miloš Krajčnik. This is Canuck News. Here is what we're covering today is the Bank of Canada is warning that Canada is stuck in a productivity spiral. We're going to discuss why weak business investment and heavy regulation are dragging the country down, and how long productivity is now driving the affordability crisis. Let's get into it. So we have this main article here, Canada stuck in a vicious circle of low productivity, the Bank of Canada says. And the reason why I'm getting into this is I believe it ties into this wider story that I've been discussing, really that push into these major infrastructure projects for this mineral extraction, the pipelines, and all of that. In this big push to rebuild that new value that Canada can be creating and kind of building out new supply chains of value within the country that have just basically died down a bit. But let's get into the story itself. It says, the Bank of Canada said the country is stuck in a vicious circle of low productivity and suggested lowering the regulatory burden for companies and increasing the competition as part of a coordinated push to improve the country's growth prospects. So this is very important right here, because if they're basically saying that productivity is a number of things, the regulation, the actual bureaucracy that exists for businesses to flourish in the country is actually choking the Canadian economy. And it's funny that this is mentioned because Maxime Bernier was quite vocal about this in the last election when he was on PBD, for instance, or when he was on Joe Rogan as well. He mentioned that, the Canadian provinces, they actually have higher trade barriers to trade amongst each other than to actually trade with the US, which is insane. So, what's really the value of opening up shop and being, all Canadian if you can't actually, if it's going to cost you more to sell within Canada, outside of your province, than to just export to the US into a different currency denomination, right? Which is crazy. In and of itself, that idea is insane. So he says in a speech on Wednesday, Deputy Governor Nicolas Vincent made the case that Canada is facing a systemic problem when it comes to productivity, which can be understood as output per worker, or how efficiently labor and capital are combined to produce goods. So this another very important point is we're apparently not, for the amount of work that we're putting in, we're not outputting the same amount of work as we used to. That's interesting. The other thing is that we have too many trade barriers, capital's not coming in. And so this is why it's interesting with Carney's big beautiful bill that he's that legislation that he's passed. He got the budget for it as well. So we're going to see what that actually does. But it's interesting because it's all tying in together again, right? All of these stories are kind of meshing together, because now you have the Bank of Canada coming out and actually essentially indirectly supporting these initiatives, right, that are supposed to increase productivity in that value chain. And he says Canada's productivity growth has lagged peer countries for the past 2 decades, leaving Canadians poorer than they would otherwise be, and the economy less resilient to shocks such as a sharp protectionist turn from our largest trading partner. Exactly. So, and this is a 20-year issue, right? So this is a 20-year issue, and I'm sure it's accelerated during blackface Justin Trudeau's time in office, because he was there for quite a bit, and quite honestly, I don't really know anything that he did well in that decade that he was there. But I know before that life was very affordable in Canada, and that you could easily live off of one wage, and you could do a whole bunch of things with a lot less money. And so that's key. And I wanted to show you guys. So I actually have a couple of graphs here that I wanted to show you real quick. Just a second. So this first graph is it actually shows Canada's GDP per capita versus its peers from 2007. Well, I mean, it goes earlier, but if we look at it from around this trajectory, this is really where we started excessively losing. We were kind of there, and then we just lost, right? That's the gain. That's when we were high and above and everything was good. So the loss starts from 2007, essentially. That's what the graph is showing. And then it just completely collapsed. And we had a recession in this area as well. And this second graph here, it's actually showing labor productivity growth in Canada. So hours worked versus output. And you can see how this is. So the red would be hours worked, and then the blue would be the output, right? The productivity itself. So you can see we're actually becoming more. So we're putting in hours, and we're not outputting more value for the hours that we're actually inputting, right? So that's not good. And here we have another trend line as well. And this is just the Canada versus the OECD on GDP per capita growth, right? And as you can see, right in 2022, Canada's flipped. So we've started trending lower than OECD countries, which is never really a good thing. It's never really a positive note. But all of this vicious cycle that that they discuss, it really comes down to various root causes that the Bank of Canada is really pointing on, right? There's structural problems. We have weak business investment. There's a lot of overregulation across provinces. I mentioned that. In the cities, there's lack of. Canada has a lot of monopolies or oligopolies. Our banking sector is tight. You have Canada's like big 5-6 banks. There's no other banks. In Canada, there's no like smaller regional banks to help support the economy, and that's actually a very interesting point. I watched an interview, and I can't remember his name now, which is very unfortunate. But I watched an interview on Tucker Carlson about 2 or 3 months ago, and it was with an economist, and he was the guy that essentially invented quantitative easing. And he said the reason for the U.S.'s massive growth back in the day and China's recent drastic economic growth is really due to having smaller regional banks, because the supply of money is easy, right? Nothing is consolidated. Competition exists within the financial sector. Within money itself, there's competition, right? And so that boosts the economy in and of itself. It was a very interesting. I highly suggest you guys find it. I will find it, and I'll put the episode's name in my description after the episode. Highly suggest it. But even airlines, right? We have Air Canada. We have a couple other airlines. There's nothing really there. Telecom, what do we have? We have Bell and we have Rogers. We don't have anything. So the whole system is kind of tied in, right? And because of this is one of those reasons why you have that vicious cycle, right? That vicious circle, right? And what we're seeing now is because we have this low productivity, we're running into lower profits, right? There's lower wages, or wages are stagnant and everything's more expensive, right? There's lower investment because no one wants to come in because there's too much red tape, and it ultimately just inhibits the country's ability to grow, right? And so this is a very, very honestly deep and disturbing thing to be seeing, and it's again, it goes back to that systemic problem that exists in Canada, where the politicians have just been lulled into doing this cross-border trade with the US and not thinking long-term. There has never been any long-term strategy. Everything that's happening right now is completely reactionary, to Donald Trump's protectionist tariffs. So that's why I say, Donald Trump did us a favor by putting on these tariffs, because we're actually being forced to act and act quickly, right? Because otherwise we'd be completely screwed. There's nothing that Canada would be able to do. We would be screwed, and we actually might be. We're going to see what all of this investment into these into our natural resources is going to look like. But another key thing here is that the Bank of Canada is supposed to be a neutral entity, right? And they're breaking that neutrality. They're speaking out. They're saying things need to change, guys. We need to change our tax policies. The regulation needs to come down. Our competition laws suck. These provincial it's all a catastrophe. Like, you can even see, like, right here, this sentence says, to put it bluntly, we're stuck in a vicious cycle. When productivity is weak, it's much harder to meet current challenges and seize opportunities for the future. And then he goes down. He says, it's a whole slew of things that need to exist, that need to change. So that's a very serious call out by Nicolas Vincent, right? It's a whole business climate, right? It's almost a supply chain of a catastrophe that exists in the Canadian economy, right? And so over the last, I don't know, I think since like 2013, what's been really happening in Canada that people think have been that inflationary effect that has kind of taken hold in Canada that's now popped is that real estate bubble that's existed, right? It's that wealth effect. Your main property is growing in value and you think you're richer, but you're really not, right? Because even if you sell that property, you have to turn around, you have to buy a more expensive property, or you downgrade and you collect some cash, but now you're living in a smaller place, right? So it's like, it's a vicious cycle, right? And Canada's blown that balloon up so far that it's honestly, I don't know how low real estate prices are going to come down because of this, but housing is a complete and critical issue. Infrastructure is a complete issue as well, because we're also bringing in a whole bunch of people. There's these targets by 2100 for Canada to have 100 million people, and so they've just kind of opened the floodgates for immigration. So, they say that everybody's a skilled worker, tradesmen, these high knowledge workers and all of that. I would question it, to be honest. I would question the amount of actual welfare that is paid by Canada to recent citizens or to permanent residents, and how long these certain people have been on welfare. And I mean like actual welfare, like, you need it for sustenance. You're not like a disabled person like you, or you're healthy and all of that, you're just unemployed. Like, how many people are actually abusing the system, right? To be creating that productivity drop. Because the smaller the productivity is, you really need to keep like taxes higher, because you need to actually support these people that are on welfare, right? And so I think the criterion for welfare has to be taken under consideration, kind of the way, honestly, Elon Musk did with the Department of Government, Doge. Just to put everything under scrutiny. I think Canada needs to kind of go through a scrutiny thing. And so here, I brought this article up because it says Ontario cancels fast-tracking immigration programs for skilled trades. I'm not going to read the article, but we never used to fast-track anybody. Everybody used to go through a very stringent approval process previously, and our productivity was good. The Canadian standard of life was good. The quality of life was good. It was great. And ever since we started fast-tracking new citizens, new people into our country, and I have nothing against immigration in and of itself. I'm a child of immigrants. That's not the issue. The issue is we need to bring in people at a steady state so that our economy can continue to grow. And what we've seen is this influx of people that blackface Justin Trudeau brought in, has done the exact opposite. We have people living in basements. We have students living in basements. They're in like Toronto. There's like 20 people caught in a basement, living in a basement. Like, what the hell is that? That's crazy. We can't be having that kind of that kind of stuff going on. And I just wanted to kind of go into the bottom here, bottom of the article, just because I think this is key here as well. And it says, if we want to make things more affordable, we need to raise our income. And the way to grow our income is by increasing productivity. Even modest improvements make a big difference, right? So this is the Bank of Canada, Nicolas Vincent, the governor of the Bank of Canada, saying this. This is, I guess, as well. Deep down, Canada's affordability problem is really a productivity problem. Inflation has come back down after spiking. Exactly. So we need to raise our income. The only way you can raise your income is by providing actual value to a market, to your own market and to global markets. That's how you bring value, right? Canada's economy is, for the most part, has been largely based on exports going into the U.S. and all of that. But it's those exports. It's always a question of what value add are those exports actually bringing. And that's a serious issue, right? Because if it's just lumber, if it's just this and that, these simple things, those industries are going to thrive as long as they're actively being, acquired, as long as lumber is actively being purchased by the U.S., steel, aluminum, and all of that, right? But as soon as we have smaller amounts of that, it automatically starts crumbling. But if we had new supply chains, manufacturing of this and that value add would continue to increase. We would be a little bit more self-sustaining. Obviously, we would sell to the U.S. because they're literally 10 times bigger than Canada in population and in economy. So obviously, it makes sense to want to sell to them. You'd be an idiot not to want to sell to them, right? But it's how we're going to conceptualize our economy to bring new value into people's lives, so that we can actually grow our overall incomes, bring down inflation, and recreate that standard of living that used to make Canada a wonderful place to be. So this article is essentially a public warning that essentially, without any major reform, Canadians will continue to get poorer relative to advanced countries. And I think that's a sad thing. I think that's a really sad thing that we're going through. But let me know what you guys think in the comments. I'd love to hear what you guys think. My name is Miloš Krajčnik. Stay curious, stay informed, and God bless Canada.
This is Canada. Maple syrup and